Hi investors. Today we're going to do a review of a place called Stalybridge. It's east of Manchester. It's an interesting area. We're going to give it a score and then you can make your mind up as to whether you think that's a good place to invest. Okay then, let's get into it. Okay, so the way we do this is we've got a table here and we've got various weightings, we've got various headings, and I go through each of these things, give it a score, we end up with a final score. And over time, we're going to add different areas, and hopefully, those scores will be a true picture of whether these areas are good for buy to let or not. Now, the first thing is location, and as you see, I've got some different tabs open. Here we are. I'll go 2D just so you can get a rough idea of what's going on. It's 12.5k from kilometers from central Manchester, and the thing about location is it's going to be just like a house. It's how close it is to things you want to be near. And what are the things? Well, nice environment, access to city centre, and access to local amenities, i.e., does the property have its own amenities, etc. And in this case, you can see that you can commute into central Manchester within around 35 minutes. Drive time is roughly the same. And if you want to, you could even cycle, and that's around 45 minutes. The next thing is travel time, just to give you an idea of how far you can get for a given period. And we can see here you can get into city centre within 45 minutes, or most of the city centre. So from an accessibility point of view, it's reasonably good. The next question is, does it work from an amenities point of view? Well, if you like green space, then there's plenty of it nearby. And in terms of location, like access to major amenities, there's a superstore, etc. So it's a good location overall, I would say. Um, Really, the defining question for whether it's a great location or not is whether it's an accessible place for people to travel into wherever there's work. And the answer is it's reasonably good, but not the best. I would say for that reason, overall, I would say it's a 3.5. And the reason I give it a zero point 0.5 is because that little extra is it's in the hills, it's a beautiful place, and if you wanted to live there, you're going to put up with more travel probably, but you get a lovely place and you've got plenty of stores and things like that nearby. So that works. Demographics is a big topic, but just to give you context, this is the NRS social grade. And the way that works is that the government uses it and it helps them work out the characteristics of a given area. And there are all sorts of correlations between social grade and wealth and the kind of areas that people live in. And as a general rule, people always seem to aspire to live in the best area they can. Areas don't change in characteristics very much from one decade to another unless there's a huge urban regeneration. And therefore, really, when you're looking at demographics, in this context for buy to let, what we're actually looking at is not the highest demographic possible. We're looking at the best demographic for renting because we're interested in buying a property to rent it out to somebody. And therefore, it's really Bs and C1s. C1s especially, they don't have the money to buy a property, but they have enough disposable income to rent a nice place, have a car, live well, etc. So to help make sense of this, I've got the DataShine website. It's really useful for just getting a general sense of what's going on. And as you can see, this is social AB, this is central Manchester. You can see that people kind of aggregate in various areas. But we're interested in C1s because they're the people who rent property. And you can see here very high concentrations and then little smatterings all over the place. The question is, how does it look in Stalybridge? And the answer is that, I think this is Stalybridge here. So let's just put a postcode in there. Yeah, there it is. The answer is there's actually quite a lot of C1s in Stalybridge, which is encouraging. So it shows that it's not an especially wealthy area. If we go to AB, for example, not that many ABs. But that's okay because, again, we want to find out, we want people who are renting. So which areas have plenty of private rented? And what we're looking for are areas probably around 25%, that kind of thing. And you can see at the closer to central Stalybridge you get, the more privately rented there is. And the further out, the lower the percentage. And bear in mind, do you remember we talked about C1s and how there were so many here? Look at the proportion of privately rented along this stretch. So C1s and renting, they correlate, and therefore you're looking for those correlations. Overall with Stalybridge, I would say it works pretty well from that point of view. So let's give it a score. And we're going to say on demographics, I'm going to give it a reasonably high score, not a 5, but again, a 3.5, because I think it does work. The thing about crime is it's very localized. So you can't say, is Stalybridge a high crime area overall? Because it's impossible. It's dangerous to generalize, basically. And the reason is that you can have a lot of crime in a little patch. So here at the Tesco's, over a year-long period, 24 crimes. In this little patch, this area here, 14. However, in residential, you might have 1 or 2. So in this little patch, 1 crime over a whole year-long period. 1 crime. Therefore, when you're looking at crime, it's best to look at specific patches and go, okay, here's a quiet area, for example, 10 crimes here. That's not good. Therefore, I would avoid this little patch. That doesn't mean I'm going to avoid Stalybridge. So therefore, you've got to take, to be accurate with crime, look at it on a very low level. You can look at the Police UK for that data. The other thing about crime is crime doesn't necessarily correlate with wealth. You can have rich areas, like, for example, central London, very high crime. They're rich areas. You can have poor areas, very low crime. It just, you got to take it on a case by case. But overall, for Stalybridge, on a crime score, I'm going to give it a 4 because actually it's doing fine. Capital growth is a big topic, and I'll just skim through the basics on it. This number here represents capital growth since 2017. It helps me understand the long-term picture with an area. And if it's a minus, it means that if you bought a house in 2007, you sold it, and it's minus, in real terms, it's declined in value. In real purchasing power terms, if it's 0, it's broken even. If it's plus 20, for example, in real purchasing power terms, you gained 20% in real terms on your asset. So this is a big deal, and capital growth is very variable, but generally you can say it works in regions. And overall, when you look at the Manchester story, capital growth is most likely towards the centre and the southwest. In this area, capital growth so-so, long-term growth not great. However, we've really got to look at another story here, which is the shorter term growth and how that's been doing. So I'm going to hide an area, and we're going to look at the 5-year growth on Stalybridge. And over 5 years, it's done okay. It's grown in real terms by 8%. So if you bought 5 years ago, you're 8% richer in real terms. But other areas have grown by 22, 30%. So broadly, Stalybridge hasn't done great. If we look at the 1-year growth story, not great. And bear in mind, this is relatively up-to-date data for these for postcode district data, which this is. So this represents a population of 27,000, and it's not a great capital growth story. It's okay, just not great. Now, if you look at other videos I've done, other areas have just been disastrous on capital growth. Stalybridge, so I'm going to give it a 3 because actually I think there are better places to buy on growth. Now for time to sell, we got data for that one, and I'm going to show you here. The market is reasonably strong here. On average, if you put a property on the market and you get it to completion, it's going to take somewhere over a year on average. And what that means is really good properties are probably going to go under offer within a month or less. Then stuff that's just hanging around could hang around 6-8 months or whatever. Then you've got time to completion, and therefore it's okay. It's not great. For context, you look at central Manchester where there's a lot of high rise. The reality is that you won't sell a property in under a year. Like, it might take a year, even 2 years. Just property is not moving. It's really, really slow. However, in these kind of places, it's okay. So time to sell, it's okay. I'm going to give it a 3. It's not screaming at me. I'm not like, ugh. Okay. Now for time to rent, the way this works, similar to time to sell, it just looks at all the properties for rent in this postcode district area, and then it looks at the percentage that drop off. So in other words, you start with 100% of properties, and by the end of the month you got 78% have disappeared. Therefore you can say the turnover is 78% per month. The reality here, if you were to rent a nice property, you'll rent it in a couple of weeks. So it's a high turnover. We don't have data for Stalybridge, but based on OL6 and the surrounding, I would say you would rent something out that's decent within 1 month. So for time to rent, it's not super hot. I'm afraid I'm going to give it a 3 again. And let's look at yield. Now, that's another story. And to do that, to understand yield, we've got to zoom back in again. And we're going to show this layer here. We have our own algorithms that work out rental yield, and we aggregate a huge amount of rental data on the whole country, in fact, except Scotland. And then we use our algos to kind of make some rough assessments. So we say, what would the rent be for a property like that? We reckon around 580. And how much is it for sale? Well, it's 125. Therefore, your yield is 5.5. My feeling about this area is that if you're buying a property which is an ideal buy to let, i.e. terraced house, 2 bedrooms, family accommodation, you'll get over 5.2%. which is a really good place to start. At 5.2%, you pass the bank stress test. So if you're a mortgageable, if everything lines up, you might be able to get your 75% loan to value. For yield, I'm going to give it 4%. So now when we look at the final scores on this, my overall feeling with Stalybridge is that yes, it's a decent spot for buy to let. It's certainly not the best. If it was a horrendous area, then obviously it would be down in the 20s, 20%, that kind of region. But this is solid. You will find a good property to rent, and you will find good tenants there. There are better areas if you factor in capital growth. So to get a really high number like a 90, 100, if you had everything you had in Stalybridge, maybe a bit closer to central Manchester, and you had the robust capital growth that you're seeing in places like M40, then the whole deal just really works. So I hope that was helpful, and until the next time, good investing.